you wouldn't have had to trademark your band name if you just made better music.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. Like,
It's true. Yeah. Awesome. You ready to rock?
yeah, for sure.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. I apologize to everyone who's watching this as my orange sweater is just beaming off, but very excited for this episode. I'm going to be talking with Bryanna from the band BUGGIN. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to chat with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And BUGGIN for me has been a band that's come on my radar probably in the last few months here. It was actually, I have to give a shout out to Trent from Gadget,
Oh yeah.
as he recommended the band to me. Originally, he was like wanting us to inquire with you guys about coming out to play Calgary, and that absolutely needs to happen post-COVID. Because I am a big fan of what you guys are doing. And I would love to talk about the origins of the band and some of the stuff around what's happening in the world right now. But before I continue to ramble on, can you just do a proper intro, your name, who you are, and where you're based, and, you know, how people would know you in hardcore?
Yeah, so my name's Bryanna. I'm from the suburbs of Chicago. I grew up in Buffalo Grove, and I've lived in Chicago for the past 4 years, actually. So I am in the band BUGGIN. I've been into hardcore since I was like in high school. So it's been a while, actually. It's like kind of crazy to see that I'm still like kicking with this.
Right.
And yeah, I love Trent. Gadget are those are like our best friends. Before all this hit, we were supposed to play a record, like our tape release show,
Right.
and that we were like gonna have them come out, and obviously not anymore. I also had gotten my passport expedited because we were supposed to go on tour,
Right.
and we were going to Toronto, and I got it, and then COVID hit, so
Right.
never mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was actually just listening because I know that you did a podcast with my friend Jamie. So, you know, some of those things that you're sharing were similar to On That Story, but that was a few months ago, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
I've actually had to go through a similar experience to expedite my passport, and it is very, very stressful. I don't know how much time you had to, or what your circumstance was.
Yeah, okay, so I've never had a passport before in my life,
Oh, it
so this
was
was my
first
first one
time.
ever.
Gotcha.
And yeah, I've never been out of the country before, and so this was gonna be like my first time actually leaving the country.
Hmm.
And so it just like took a really long time because I was like trying to figure out how to do it. And it's like really, really specific here. Like you can't use a credit card. You have to either pay with like a money order or a check
Oh,
or
weird.
something like that. So like just getting everything like yeah, getting everything sorted out was like really annoying. So then by the time I finally figured it out, it like was getting close to it. So I only had like 4 weeks.
Oh,
So
wow.
I got it expedited just to make sure.
Yeah.
And then COVID and no more leaving the country right
Yeah.
now. So
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think the last thing I saw as far as our prime minister, which is the equivalent of a president to you guys, I guess, you know, extended that to like the end of July, and, you know, potentially, you know, depending on when someone's listening to that, it's like, yeah, borders are still closed. But you know, I told the longer version about what happened with my passport, because I essentially needed to leave because I filmed the Snow and Flurry Fest in Minneapolis.
Mhm.
And I realized a week before, or it was less than a week before, that I just couldn't find my passport. So I had to do like a day turnaround time. And it was literally like the day we were
Oh my
supposed to
God.
leave. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to go, guys. So like, we'll just see what happens. And luckily the stars aligned. But if you want to hear the full story of that, go back to talk about, I think it's the Snow and Flurry recap podcast. But
Okay.
yeah, I highly recommend if you're wanting to see me retell the moments of absolute stress. But obviously that's not what we're here for. But B, you were mentioning on you've been involved in hardcore for a minute now. And I always like to get context about how people, first heard of the subgenres. Like, what were the first records that you were listening to and what prompted you to get involved? So can you kind of roll back the clock and tell me about like those formative years and how you were discovering that music for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not gonna lie, I totally found hardcore from Tumblr. I just like I think
Okay.
that's just our like the generation that I'm in, like in our like young like early 20s. That's just kind of how it is. Like the internet, we've just grown up with it like our entire lives. So it kind of like makes the most sense. But like basically, I used to be really into like pop punk and metalcore when I was in like junior high.
Mhm.
And then like I just started to discover like more and more like aggressive music as like the time went on. And so I was on Tumblr and I would see people like posting about all these bands all the time. And I was like, oh, that looks cool. Like, and posting like pictures, I was like, oh, that shit looks insane. Like,
Mm.
I have to check this out. Like, I have to see what's going on here. So, like, the first hardcore bands that I listened to ever were Incendiary, The Rival Mob, Backtrack, and Rotting Out. And those are like my formative, like, four of like getting into hardcore and just like shaping like the style of hardcore that I've always liked.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how that started. I started going to shows around like my junior year of high school. And then I started a zine also because I like wanted to meet people. And I was like just like a nervous, like awkward kid. So I didn't know what to do. And so for my first zine, I interviewed Matt Sainecombe from Zero Progress and now who does the Hard Times,
Oh,
and
cool.
John Hoffman from Weekend Nachos.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually probably like the coolest experience I've ever had, especially as like a young kid getting into hardcore, because I like saw him at a show and I was like, hey, like I'm starting this scene. Like I would really like to interview you guys. Like I think they had just had their 10-year show. Um, and that was a really cool lineup. It was like Weekend Nachos, and I remember Sex Prisoner played, and I think Malintent played back when they were a thing out here as well.
Mhm.
And I just asked him if I could interview him, and he invited me to like get Mexican food with him like in the city. And like because I was in high school, my dad drove me and like sat in the restaurant just to like make sure. Like I totally understand like I don't know, if my 16-year-old was like, yeah, I'm gonna drive into the city and meet up with some like 30-year-old man and like talk to him in a restaurant, I probably also would be a little bit concerned.
Right.
But it was so cool. Like we just talked like we had known each other for like ever, even though this was like literally our first time talking to each other. And so that was like what solidified like, oh, this shit is like really cool and I want to keep on doing this. So
Yeah.
I did the zine for a while. I came out with like 3 issues. It was called United Slam. Um, and then after that, while that was going on, I was in another band. The first band I was in was called Tigress. It was more of like a hardcore punk band.
Mhm.
So that was another thing that my dad was driving me to, like every Friday, basically driving me into the city to like have band practice.
Yeah.
So that's like basically the start of where everything happened.
Yeah, mad shout out to your dad for really allowing and enabling you to get involved in music. And that's something I've noticed with a lot of things with people who are really involved in hardcore, whether it is their career or they're just like super involved, is really having parents who either got the whole aspect of like doing weird shit, like either going on tour or being friends with all these like 30+ year olds. And
Yeah.
I've definitely come full circle because I remember going to shows when I was like 17, 18 years old. And, I would, be talking with people who were in their late 20s and early 30s. And now that I'm that same person, I'll go to a show in Calgary and I'll talk with someone and they're like, yeah, I'd love to do that, but I don't have a license or I'm still in high school. And then I'm like, well, this is really crazy. But I think
Yeah.
that's uh, a really great strength about hardcore is that it is just this collection of people of different races, different ages, different backgrounds, and everyone just is there for the love of the music. You brought up the whole zine that you were doing, and you were mentioning on how I guess maybe one of your goals with that was like, I'm gonna put something out into the, the hardcore world, if you will, but also a way for you to meet people.
Mhm.
So I guess like I've interviewed enough people to kind of know like hardcore is a little daunting the first time that you go to a show, especially if you're by yourself. And
Yeah.
and I don't know if there was maybe an extra, I guess like an extra, I guess, needing to have a little bit of a wall up as far as like, I'm going to the show, and I'm not sure exactly like how many Black individuals are in the Chicago space, but like largely speaking, hardcore overall has a lot of male dominated white. That's kind of just how it is, and it's slowly moving into a direction where there's more colors and just more diversity, but
Mhm.
that just doesn't happen overnight. So what was, I guess, your thoughts of like, I need to have something to kind of break that barrier and really just get to know people in this scene, in this area?
Yeah, so for me, when I was starting that zine, I like had gotten into zine culture like a little bit before like starting the actual zine. And I noticed I was like, oh, this is cool. Like mostly people making like fanzines, just like interviewing bands and just like writing about music and stuff. But I was like, okay, I want to do this, but I also want to add like the political and social commentary that I know that I can contribute as like somebody that's completely different than like the majority of what we see in hardcore.
Right.
So it was kind of like me trying to like blend that together and like start the conversations again of like hardcore has always been political. We need to make sure that we're keeping it that way as well and like actually have these discussions.
Mm-hmm.
So like when I was doing it, I did have like a lot of different like pieces that I would write that weren't just necessarily like, oh, here's a band that I like and I'm going to write a review about their demo. It
Right.
was also like, here are a bunch of different voices that I can also put out there. So I had like my second issue was mostly surrounding like women involved in hardcore. I think that was kind of around the time where that like whole like girls to the front thing was like starting to become a thing.
Sure.
So I like specifically though I talked to like Black women and also like other like just other women in general to like actually talk about their experiences in hardcore, just in so that people would actually listen up. In the first issue was actually released right around when Ferguson was happening, so there was
Oh,
like
wow.
a piece
Okay.
that I wrote about Ferguson in there. Yeah, and I was like, I was honestly like a little daunted by it too, because I was like, this is the first piece of writing that I'm like kind of putting out there. And like looking back on it, it's maybe not the best piece of writing I've ever done. Granted, I was like 16 years old when I was writing it, but
Yeah.
for that to be something that I was doing at the time is like pretty cool, I think.
Yeah.
Especially because that was a new thing. Like that was just happening in real time. We were watching the Ferguson uprisings happen, and just like that was, I feel like that's when everybody, not everybody, but like that's when most people were like, oh shit, like we need to like start like talking about this shit. Like this is serious.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, my dog is barking here. I don't know why. But I think that's no. Those are two. There's two things there that I want to unpack. Like, first off, I think it's totally fine to look back at stuff that you made when you were 16 years old and be like, wow, look how far I grew, because there's a lot of cringy music that I wrote in that age bracket, and but
Oh
I
yeah.
think that's crucial. But I think the other, hey, sorry, I probably have to. I think he's freaking out because there's
Cool.
shout out to Purelator for delivering a package in the middle of the day, and my dog just freaking out because someone's attacking the house. And yeah, he's like right back
Absolutely.
on the
He's
ground
gotta
now.
check it out.
Yeah. There's one lady who comes around and she like collects like recycling and whatnot, and he's always just triggered, like, you're attacking the house. I'm like, no, she's just doing what she's got to do. But
She's just chilling.
yeah, she's just chilling. But yeah, so going back to what we were saying, because I'll have to hard cut in here, but we were just talking about just the aspect of music, especially in hardcore, being political. And I think growing up, I think that at least for me, I definitely have realized this, especially in the last couple of weeks and maybe just the past month, is that we're not really encouraged to like think politically all the time, especially in
Hmm.
like there's like certain school subjects where it's like, this is your 1 hour to like really, do, like I had a class in, I think, grade 11 called world issues. And we were just like, here's a topic. And then everyone's kind of just discussing things. But it wasn't before hardcore
Right.
that I was like, oh, like everything in life has a political nature to it. And I don't know if
Hmm.
you've seen it, but there's definitely been a lot of people where, like either a brand or a company has come out and they'll like say something about Black Lives Matter, and they're like, why does Ben and Jerry's, or why does, Nike need to be political, or whatever it is. But there
Hmm.
are certain things, like the things that I'm realizing is that everything in life you have to take a stance on. So, um, how important is that for you in not even just music in general, but just like in overall life?
Like taking a political stance on everything.
Yeah, yeah, or just like, being outspoken about like where you stand on stuff, or just I think it was also just like, I think growing up for me, there was that like, well, I just don't know how to get involved, or I don't know what's good information sources. So,
Right.
now there's, just a surplus of information when it comes to a number of different things. So, um, has that always been an importance for you growing up, as far as, just taking a stance on, just injustices and things like that? Not only just because of hardcore, but just like growing up for you?
I would say absolutely. Mostly because even if I don't want to necessarily be political, my very existence is political,
Sure.
just in general. Like, I'm a Black person, I'm non binary, I'm queer as well. I am like perceived as a woman always. I always will be. So I always do have to deal with like misogyny and like stances of like women's issues as well. So like I've kind of always had to have that outspokenness. I think that my parents did a pretty good job about teaching me about like uh, Black history, and like what it was like just our history in general. Like I remember being like very young and watching that cartoon. I think it was like My Friend Martin or something like that.
Okay.
Um, and like stuff like that, and like making us watch Roots like as a family, like, and also teaching us about like Black inventors. So I think that that already instilled that spark in me, and then just growing up more into myself and my identity and realizing like who I am, realizing that I don't really have an option to not be political.
Yeah.
I think also when it came to those like really formative teenage years, so when I was in Tigris, like, and I was practicing basically every week, we practice at our bass player and our guitar player, Charlie and Jack. They lived together at this house, and we would practice in their basement. And so they were also both really, really involved in the punk scene here, and also really involved in activist efforts. So like when I was 16, I was like learning about like what anarchy actually is. Like they're
Right.
basically like all leftists and like actually giving me literature to read, and like I didn't understand it all at first, but then like they gave me the building blocks to like radicalize myself even more. So I think like on top of what I had already learned, and then in this formative period of my life, like hanging out with these like 20 something year olds at their house, and like they would like organize, we would have meetings to like write letters to like political prisoners.
Mm.
I helped start like a bake sale for a show that we were doing for to donate to another political prisoner, like stuff like that. So I was doing stuff like that when I was like 16 years old, and
Right.
like also doing jail support for like friends that were like getting arrested. So I think that just I've always just been like this. I've always been somebody that's like pretty like stubborn in general, and like just like hates authority. So like paired on top of what I actually learned and like the actions that I was able to be a part of when I was in high school, like really like transformed everything for me. So I honestly like so they called the house Weenie Hut Junior. Like they used to host shows there all the time and everything until like the landlord sold the house. It was like the best place ever, especially for somebody like that was like me at the time, that was just like really angry at the whole entire world and just like trying to figure out like where my place in the world actually is and like what I can actually do
Right.
now that I'm like watching people being like killed on the internet, and like what I can actually do to like support Black lives and like support like the movement for prison abolition and like abolishing the police and like all of that. So like I had that foundation like laid for me pretty early, which is, I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a big thing that I'm realizing is that if people don't have maybe that, you know, this whole movement is coming at a very interesting time with a lot of people being laid off, not able to work, money being tight. But, you know, if you don't have dollars to throw at bail funds or organizations or things like that, like I'm kind of in a similar boat. Like a lot of my stuff was like freelance work, and that's kind of the first to go when all this kind of went down. But the thing
Yeah.
when I was trying to think about like, okay, how can I, it's either raising money or raising awareness. So, you know, I have this like small
Exactly.
podcast. Like the least that I can do is like bring on Black and people of color guests to like talk about what's going on, to share their perspectives and just kind of be a small megaphone for them, to talk about that house. Is that a SpongeBob reference to be like Weenie Hut Juniors?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely
Because as soon as you said that, I was just like brought straight back to the movie there. So that's really hilarious. Yeah, but I think it is like, you know, it's in a, I think I mentioned this on the last podcast, is that there's a lot of people who are quick, especially on social media, to try to be an expert in something, whether that's like social justice issues or like environmental issues or like things with the economy because of coronavirus. But I think it takes a lot of humility to like admit that you don't know enough and just allow people who have maybe like more experience because they were raised on that, to be the louder voice and to just be a sponge and absorb that.
Absolutely. I also think that like we're always constantly learning. Like
Yeah.
even somebody that seems like they know everything about what's going on, like even somebody that's super articulate on the internet about what's going on and just like has always been that way, like we're still learning too. Like
Yeah.
there's always like a book that I probably haven't read yet that I need to read. And I think that's so crucial, especially at a time like this, unlearning systemic racism that like literally plagues our every single day life.
Yeah.
Like you have to read. Like it's just not an option to only like scroll on Twitter and only make tweets. Like you have to read. Like you're always building on what you have, and I feel like you just never stop learning.
Yeah.
Even if it's not necessarily from a book, but like from a real life experience too, and like from your peers. It's like really important for us to like make sure that we are actually doing the work.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think long form content, if you want to umbrella term it, is like so valuable because it's, you know, whether that's a documentary, a podcast like this, or a book, like something that you can actually put, you know, hours into to like digest and like think about versus just like being bombarded with like, you know, the little tidbits that can be retweeted. I think there needs to be a balance of both, but I think more value and effort should be put into consuming long form. You were mentioning when you were growing up that your parents kind of taught you a lot about Black history and things like that. Something that I've learned in the last little week is just the realities of people who are of color having to have that conversation with their kids at some point when they're growing up about, you know, this whole like systemic racism and the police and things like that. So if this is the very first time either someone's hearing that or, you know, whether they're watching, can you explain to me like what that's actually like, or if you remember having that conversation with your parents?
Yeah, I'll say I remember the first time, like at least that I can remember, The first time I recall like my parents having a conversation with me about like just being Black and trying to be proud of like who we are was um in the third grade. My dad, like I used to go to a private Christian school actually for like a few years. It was really weird and I actually hated it there. But my dad like was called in as like a presenter for like Black History Month, and he did this presentation about Black inventors. And so we had a conversation about how Black people have basically invented like almost everything that we use today, and just like there's just so much that nobody knows, like nobody is aware of like how much Black inventors like have actually like contributed to our society, like stuff like peanut butter and like traffic lights, like we wouldn't have that without Black people.
Wow.
So like that was literally like the first time that I can remember like my parents being like, listen, like the world is unfair and like Black people have done like really amazing things and people still just like don't care for it. I feel like, to be fair, we didn't really have a conversation about, I didn't really have a conversation about the police as much as they had one with my little brother. Because we did grow up in a very white suburb. I grew up in Buffalo Grove, and there's just not a lot of diversity there, like at all. Like
Sure.
there's a very large Jewish population and there's a lot of like Asian people as well. But in my high school, like I knew every single Black person. Like there is 4,000 kids in the whole entire school, and there's maybe 100 Black kids.
Wow.
In the whole school.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So like I remember like listening to them talking to my brother about like how he shouldn't wear his hood up, and like when he was getting older, like he was getting really tall and like he was getting like a really deep voice and like starting to like grow up, but he was still really young. So they would talk to him about like how people are gonna perceive him as older than he is. Like people are gonna perceive him as a threat just because he's tall and exists and is like dark skin.
Right.
So I remember like all of those conversations, and then like having us watch like My Friend Martin Luther King, and just like learning about all this stuff at such a young age is just like, it's really upsetting, especially when you're a kid, because you don't really know how to process everything. Like my immediate reaction when I would watch like the KKK like meetings in like a movie that we were watching would be like, yo, like fuck white people, like I hate all white people, like this is horrible, like I can't believe this, like I can't believe like this is what happened to like our people. And like that was my immediate reaction at like a young age. And because I didn't understand that it was so like systemic, and then like from there, growing up with that foundation and then actually learning like the words about it, it was kind of also difficult growing up where I did, because even though my parents were trying to educate me about this stuff, I would see all this stuff about how Black people were just like so hated. And then I grew up around only white people. So there was times where I didn't want to be Black. I just like, because I felt like such an outsider. I was like, okay, first of all, I'm a weird kid. And second of all, I'm a Black kid that's also weird. So like growing up where I did, it was just like not great for my self-esteem. And like if I could have had the option to go back in time and like choose a more diverse area to grow up in and like go to school in, I think it would have been even more helpful. And I'm glad I did I've done the work, like I've done the unlearning. It's just like something that I think a lot of Black people have to grapple with is internalized racism. Like growing up and seeing only European like beauty standards on television, and like growing up in junior high and like watching all of my friends that were like white, like they're all dating somebody, and like me being like, oh, like maybe people don't like me because I'm Black, and then thinking like, oh no, that's not it, that can't be it, and then growing up and learning that that is actually why. Like I would be in junior high and like sitting on the sidewalk and kids would like drive by on a bus and scream the N-word at me. Like like that's pretty clear that like it is because you're black that people do not like you. And so yeah, it was a lot of stuff to grapple with, and I'm glad that I did a lot of unlearning. Again, Tumblr was pretty like the internet is such a great resource, and I know like a lot of shit gets thrown at Tumblr, rightfully so. But I can't lie, like it was pretty crucial for me, like growing up and being like 14 and 15, and like actually learning about more systemic racism and like how this is actually like such a huge wide scale thing, and that you should be proud of being black, and like there's nothing wrong with that. And just because somebody doesn't like it or like somebody doesn't want to date you for it, that's their problem and not mine.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really great point, because I've seen that as well, where there's almost like a brainwashing, like whether that's through another person or a group, or if it's just to yourself, where you can't, like there is shame for the color of your skin, which 100% there should not be. The fact that yeah, people are thinking like I've been heartbroken to like read stories of people sharing like moments when they were younger, of like sitting in a bathtub of bleach, and they were trying to like be unblack themselves, and that's heartbreaking to me, to have that be a part of like who you are, and then like the world told that that's a bad thing. And if you can be more white, whether it's the way you talk, the way that you dress, like whatever it is, like the world will accept you more, and that's absolutely fucked. So and I, going back to an earlier point for you, like black people and black culture has brought in a lot of really great things into our society, like peanut butter for sure. Like I'm a huge fan. But even on the music side as well, like, there's so many aspects from like from blues and from like even hardcore as well. Like Bad Brains is one of the earliest OG hardcore bands. Like if you want to throw 10 names on the wall, and that band was entirely of black people. And now it's like the most recent all black band that I can say off the top of my head is Zulu. And there's it's more like one black person or two in the band. So no, I think it's really important to be proud of who you are, and to, like you said, be educated on like what black people have brought to this world, because there's a lot of really great stuff, like you said.
Absolutely. And I think like it really starts with our like children as well. Like just telling like a little black girl something like, oh, I like your hair, when she has like little pigtails and like a ton of barrettes and stuff. So that what like people think that stuff is like ghetto. Like that's what society will tell them is like, oh, this is ghetto. Like this isn't professional. Like they've banned that shit from schools. Even like they've sent home girls for wearing dreads and just like stuff like that. Like when I was younger, like I used to straighten my hair literally all of the time because I couldn't stand to see like what my actual hair looked like. I didn't know what to do with it. Like I was like, oh, this is ugly. Like I'm going to get made fun of. But then I was like, you know what? Like that was when I started, like when I learned about like social justice issues, like about blackness, about like systemic racism, like that's when I started to have the type of attitude that I have now, where I just don't care what anybody thinks about me, like at all. Yeah. And I try to like make that as abundantly clear as possible, because as long as I'm proud of who I am, then that's all I care about. Like at the end of the day, I'm the only person that I'm going to have, like I feel like you're really the one that is looking out for you the most, more than anybody else is. Yeah. So like you really do have to love yourself, and loving yourself along with that is loving like your skin color and loving your culture and like loving exactly who you are and like your hair and everything. And now I don't have any hair, which I think is a lot better than having any, but the hair thing is really, really crucial for Black girls, I think.
For sure.
But yeah.
Yeah. And I like, you also brought like just I'm a big advocate for just like self-awareness in general, and I think it's almost a greater challenge to practice that muscle of, you know, not like knowing who you are, knowing what makes you happy, and like not allowing,
Mm.
you know, like there is a fine line of like not being delusional, but at the same time like not getting too high on the praises but getting too low on the criticisms or the hate. So I think, yeah, a
Mm.
lot more people just need to just kind of be like, I'm in my own lane, I'm going to do my thing, and just be proud of that. I'm blanking on the other thing I was going to bring up. But we'll just keep moving along here. So you do vocals in a band called Buggin,
Yeah.
formerly Buggin Out,
Hmm.
and it's funny
Yeah.
when I've listened to the latest EP. There's like a song called Buggin Out, so it's like bugging out, bugging out on my dashboard on my car, which is always funny. But yeah, tell me about like, you know, you were mentioning there's a few bands that you've, you know, either played in or done vocals in prior to Buggin, but what was tell me the origins of that band and kind of what you guys wanted to do as a band, you know, when you started getting together.
Yeah, so basically, it started out with me, Michael, and Peyton, and we all went to college together. We also like when I was going to shows when I was still in high school, I would drive up to Milwaukee a lot because kind of in Chicago, there's like shows here in the city in Chicago, like, and then there's also shows in Indiana and Wisconsin, and getting to either state is not far. Like it's maybe like 2 hours tops
Right.
to get to either Indiana or like Wisconsin for shows. So it was really helpful to like spread that out. And when I was like younger, there weren't a lot of kids my age like going to shows at that time. Like everybody was really old, I felt like.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like the two of the only people that were like close to my age that were going to the same shows that I was. So we just kind of started like talking and like we realized that we were all going to go to the same college. They're like a year older than I am. So they went before I was, and then I was a senior in high school, and they like gave me a little tour of like their dorms and everything at DePaul. Um, so I could like be like, oh yeah, like I really want to go here. And so we were all in college, and we just like started hanging out a lot more and just like talking a lot more because we were all going to hardcore shows and we were all at the same school. So we were just like hanging out after a while, like almost every day. Like they had an apartment that was like right by campus, so I would just like show up there, like, and then text them and be like, "Hey, I'm outside," with like not announcing that I was even coming over.
Right.
And we started like talking about starting a band because, to be fair, like I love Chicago hardcore, but we were feeling like there was a lot of like similar sounding stuff coming out. Like the main like Midwestern sound is like really heavy, like stuff like mostly inspired by like Beatdown, which is totally cool. But
Right.
we were like, oh, like I kind of wish that there was a little something more, like a little something different. And we started talking about starting a band. And I was watching Do the Right Thing for an assignment, and somebody said like or no, there's a character in the movie called Buggin' Out, and I was like, oh, that's like that sounds like it could be a cool band name. So I like brought it up to them, and like we kind of had the same idea of like what we would want it to sound like, where like we don't want it to be anything serious like at all.
Right.
Like it's just something for fun. Like we just want it to be a fun sound, like something that's like similar, like in the way that Turnstile was kind of just like doing their own thing, just like
Sure.
stuff like that. And then like Outbursts and Righteous Jams, like really fun 2000s hardcore,
Yeah.
where like people would just write about being that band or like hanging out with their friends, like Razzle Dazzle and shit like that.
Right.
So we're like, we just want to have fun, so we'll do it. And Michael brought up that he played drums and Peyton played guitar, and we're like, oh shit, like we could actually do this.
Mm-hmm.
So then Peyton wrote a demo for one of our first songs, Crude Up. That was the first song that we ever wrote, and that's on our demo. And I was like actually like really impressed by it. I was like, oh, like this is actually really cool, like I absolutely want to do this. So we jammed together. We learned the song and then I wrote lyrics to it pretty quickly. We were looking for a bass player, but because I feel like we've all had such a like really interesting dynamic like over time. We're all just like kind of obnoxious and just like really goofy and like kind of stupid. Like we just like to have fun, like
Right.
none of us take ourselves seriously at all. And so we were like, we just want somebody that will like vibe well with us, that will like mesh well, and like where we don't have to feel like we're being assholes for being like obnoxious or something like that. Like somebody that will get our jokes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought about Brandon. Brandon used to be in Forced Impact, and we're like, I don't know who could play bass that's like kind of like youngish and like would want to hang out with us. So we saw him at a Trapped Under Ice played at the Cobra Lounge in like October, and we asked him because I think that was around when Force Impact was about to be like kind of done.
Yeah.
And so we asked him to join, and it just like worked out from there. And then we've just like meshed really well ever since then. So
yeah,
it's been a really fun time.
Yeah, the vibe of the band is definitely fun. I have a lot of smiles. What's the sample on I think it's off the new EP where it says "Buggin' Out"? Is it from that show or is that from something else?
No, it's from a YouTube video.
Okay.
I forgot I forgot what video it is, but it's like this guy in the drive-through, and he's like talking to somebody on the drive-through. He's like says like, "Oh, bugging out" or something like that. And we got that sample from we played a show with Show Me the Body like last winter or last fall or something like that. And they were talking about that video, and we were like, yo, like we should totally sample that because on our demo, like we had a couple samples, but we couldn't put them on the actual physical tapes because there was like a copyright infringement. But the other samples that we had on our demo, one was from a Vine, and then the other one was from a Jackie Chan movie. I want to be a cowboy, baby.
Oh, nice.
So we sampled that, but then the pressing company wouldn't allow us to put it with the samples on it because we didn't have like proper clearance or whatever.
Yeah.
So we had to take it out on the physical release, but yeah, we're just goofy.
Yeah. No, I think that might be the first time I've ever heard a band sample a Vine. So that's mad kudos to you. And then, thank you. I'm sure it's pretty common knowledge, but for any, like the few people who are like, so why did you guys drop the Out? It was largely due to another band being called Buggin' Out, and they trademarked it, I'm pretty sure you said.
Yeah. So this band from upstate New York, they're like a rap rock band or something like that. Like it's really bad. It's just like so incredibly bad. And like when we were like trying to like come up with, when I like came up with the name, I was like, yeah, like cool, it's fine. It's like a Tribe Called Quest song, and also it's a character in a movie. Like who cares if another band like has it? I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. But then this like band, they just like emailed us and were like, hey, like we have the same name. And we are like, okay, whatever, like who cares? Like that happens all the time. Like right. It's not a big deal. So we kind of just ignored them. And then they like wouldn't stop. They wouldn't leave us alone. And they're like, try to DM us and be like, hey, like there's an issue. Like we have the same band name. And I was like, I don't care. Like it doesn't matter.
We're in totally like, two different genres. Like chill
right.
out.
And we aren't making money off of this. Like we are losing money, if anything. At this point, we are lucky enough that it sustains itself. But like at first, like we're just straight up losing money. So it's not like this is something that we're trying to make big dollars off of and like get a Columbia Records deal or something like that. So we didn't think it was going to be a big deal. And then they just like, they really gunned for us and sent us an email where they're like, we got your Bandcamp removed, because they emailed Bandcamp and said that we were infringing on their copyright because they had gotten the band name trademarked as like a musician, like, and for live performances, which is fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Because they're not good. And they also have like no following. And a lot of it was like they were mad at us because they were getting emails that were meant for us, or like
Oh,
they
I
were
see.
getting kudos and like offers for shows that people meant to send to us instead of them. And so they were like,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, they were like really salty about it, and they're like, we're gonna get your shit taken down and removed from all streaming platforms, unless you change your name. And we're like, fuck you guys. Like, we didn't really have an option at that point because they had
Right.
already gotten our Bandcamp taken down, and like they did actually have a trademark, which is insane because it costs like $3,000 to trademark a band name. And I think that we've maybe spent that much in over the entirety of us being a band on like
Right.
merch.
Yeah.
So
And they've
like
probably spent,
trademarking something.
yeah, like they've probably spent close to the same amount because I'm sure they're recording music and doing shirts. So like, there's even conversations in my band where it's like, okay, do we want to rent this jam space for like $400 a month, or can we jam somewhere for free and put that money into something else? So like, I
Exactly.
like it might have taken just one of those members to be like, maybe it's not worth our time to like, bug it out band from Chicago and just like focus on our own shit. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
that's
like,
hilarious.
I'm like, you wouldn't have had to trademark your band name if you just made better music.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. Like,
It's true. Yeah. Oh man.
but
It
I mean,
is,
whatever.
yeah, like I think it's almost inevitable when you're in any genre of music, when you name your band something and then you Google it and you're like, oh, there's three other, things like there's a Plead here in Calgary and then there's a Plead like
Mhm.
over in the UK. So like
Yeah.
there's a very, very low percentage that either of those bands are either going to be on the same bill or in some kind of like situation where, they're being confused with one another. But it is funny that they got so, I guess, like triggered as a band because you guys were almost overshining them, that they're like, we gotta make this, take this to court in a way. So
Yeah, it was weird because they've been a band for longer than us.
Sure.
But like I think that so like in half the time that they've been a band, we like kind of exceeded them, and they
Yeah.
were like not happy about it, which like I guess I understand not being happy with it, but also who cares?
Yeah. There almost needs to be some kind of like gladiator rule when it comes to like, if there are two bands of the same name and neither of them want to change that, they have to like, like Scott Pilgrim like played to one another, like
And
something
I would
like that.
absolutely I would absolutely battle them in hand-to-hand combat for to add Outback onto our name.
I
I'm
would
pretty confident that we would win.
100%. And I think you said it on the last podcast is that, you guys are called Buggin officially, but, forever the real Buggin out. So
Exactly.
one question I had, just like, I was checking out your Instagram and it seems like you're just very into like art and creative things overall. So like music, photography, and something that I think about and wanted to ask you is there any pressures for you because you are Black or you are non-binary where people expect your art to represent that? Because sometimes I think like, being someone who's white, no one's ever been like, well, you need to write about these things. There's always a level of just like, freedom to like do whatever. Like for me, like I'm clearly obsessed with the color orange. Like I have orange pens,
It's a
my
great color.
AirPods. Yeah. So, but no one, connected that to anything about the color of my skin. So have you felt, um, you know, have people come up to you being like, oh, like what songs in this EP are about being Black? And you're like, well, I can sing about whatever the fuck I want.
Right. I definitely feel that a lot. Like for me, especially like the one reason I started this band and didn't want it to be serious, I didn't want to do political commentary, is because I had already done that before. Like I did that
Sure.
in Tigress. Like that's not what I was trying to do at this point in my life. Like I'm looking for a space where I can like express myself and have fun and not have to make every single aspect of what I make and what I do about my identity,
Mm.
because sometimes I want to disconnect from like all the like political shit that's going on. So like for me, like Buggin was a place for where I was trying to like not be as tokenized as I often feel in hardcore.
Sure.
Where like I totally respect and understand the like want for people to label things as like female fronted or like this is a black fronted band. Like that's cool, but like we don't say that to white dudes in hardcore. And
100%.
also like we're not a female fronted band. Like just that, first of all, that's not a genre. We've talked about this so many times. Like I don't understand how people are still not grasping this concept. It's not a thing.
Right.
Second of all, I'm not a female, so I have always rejected that. And I'm just like, I'm just trying to simply exist in this space, like, and step away, like, be able to step away from this other, like, really fucked up shit in my life so that I can, like, just have fun. And,
Yeah.
like, none of our songs are about anything. We have a song called Poser Bulldozer that Michael wrote, and it's about posers.
Right.
And like we have multiple songs about people that we think are posers and people that I don't like. And like that's really, and just us being a band and like hanging out, and like that's all it is. So I personally kind of get annoyed when people are like, "Oh, here are these black fronted bands," like, and I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to like live, or like people like expect everything that I write to be like about like being black, and I'm like, no, these are songs about people being posers, and that's it, and that's how I want to keep it. So yeah, I feel like I understand the sentiment, and I understand that what people are trying to do when these lists are put together, and I liked the playlist that you made and everything.
Oh, thank you.
But it's more so just like when I see like on Twitter where people are like, oh, here are all these black people that are in hardcore, and it's like the list is like Jesus Piece, Bloodbather, and like Kaunashi, and I'm like, that's cool, that's awesome, but have you ever considered that some of them are just simply trying to make music and don't necessarily want to be a part of this, like, I don't know, this thing that you're trying to make it out to be. Like some people are totally absolutely being political in the work that they put out, being black and in being in hardcore and like heavier music, and that's totally awesome, but not every single one of us is doing that.
Yeah.
Like I think that when it also comes to social media, like people assume that like every black person or like every like queer person is like an activist when they follow them. Like, no, I'm just talking about my real life.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Well, first off, there's so many things to unpack, but first I need to say that Poser Bulldozer is like probably top 5 legendary song names ever.
Thank you.
Secondly, I totally agree with you that there is maybe this unnecessary pressure to be like, if you are a person of color, or if you're indigenous, or if you're black, or whatever it is, if you're this minority group, you need to be like, there's more pressure to be this leader in that, and not like, a lot of things are kind of self-imposed, I'm finding in life. Like no one told me like, hey Spencer, you're into video, you got to be the person to document like what's happening in Western Canada. That was just something that I wanted to do. And you know, it's no different for my buddy Curtis, who's like, he's indigenous and he's like super involved with like making indigenous music more accessible and just more out there and getting the light that it deserves. But again, like no one came up to him and like told him, hey Curtis, like this is what you look like, so you need to like take on this lifestyle. So I think that's a great point, to be like, you know, to really let people express themselves how they want to. If it's through social commentary, like that should be great. But if it's just writing about songs about being posers and just, you know, not allowing that. And I think, you know, you brought up the playlist, and I appreciate you giving that a little bit of a plug. And I think it's always kind of I don't know if it's necessarily a double-edged sword, where, because I totally agree with you. Like we had a post, we did a podcast with my friend Steph Yurkova of the band Punitive Damage out of Vancouver. I don't know if you've heard of them.
I have heard of them, actually.
Yeah. So we got on the subject of like female fronted hardcore, and, you know, she was like, if you say that name, if you say that term just like backwards, if you said like male fronted hardcore, like that doesn't tell me anything about the band. If you said
Exactly.
Mexican fronted hardcore, you're like, what does that have to do with anything? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is good intent for someone to say that, to kind of like try and promote those people, because, you know, I have been racking my brain on like how do we encourage more people who are Black or Indigenous to get involved in hardcore, because we want diversity. We want to see, we don't want to see this sea of caucasity when it comes to like people in bands.
Mm-hmm.
But it can't just be like, hey, there's a space to do that and that's welcoming. Like hardcore is just a weird thing overall when it comes to, you know, what scratches that itch, or, you know, getting the bug, so to speak. But yeah, I do think that it's a weird balance of like not just like putting everyone in a box and it's like, here's your you know, Black music box, versus just like, hey, here are a bunch of like fun bands, and then it's not just like, oh, like here are all these bands and then, you know, you guys want to get featured. Like I think it should be constantly talked about, to be like, here are non-binary people in bands, like, and not having it as like the forefront, just have it in the mix.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think like there's a huge difference in like what you did making this playlist to like amplify like these voices and just like putting it all on a playlist, versus like alt press making some like roundup of like Black fronted bands. Like, because first of all, what the fuck does that even mean? And second of all, most of those bands, none of them sound anything alike. Like none of them sound like each other. And like you said earlier, like that doesn't tell me what it sounds like. Like you could say that Buggin' Out is Black fronted, but like that doesn't tell you what we're gonna sound like. Like you could think like if we ended up on a list with like, I don't know, like Bloodbather and like Jesus Piece, like you might think that we sound like those bands just because we're all Black. But we sound absolutely nothing like that at all.
Yeah, I think it's like I was actually like blown away by how many people had like pushed that list out, because I think there is a want for people to like give that spotlight to people, and especially smaller bands. Because when I made that list, ironically, I was like, okay, obviously I know bands like Jesus Piece and like, you know, things like that, but I really wanted to make it diverse genre wise, to show that there are people that are, you know, getting into these, you know, like call it fun hardcore, but or 2000s metalcore or whatever it is, but really giving light to like smaller bands. Like I'll just like read off a couple off the top of my head. Like End It for sure was recommended to me, and I was like really into that.
Zulu's on there, of course.
Zulu, of course.
Absence of
Be
Mind.
All End All. I don't know if you've checked them out. Yeah.
I saw them at FYA actually, like this year, which is cool.
And then a lot of people were like, and they commented on the post, but Unity from Texas, or Unity TX, it's more of like a metalcore hip hop style, which I think is kind of
it's kind of cool though.
Yeah. And they're on Pure Noise, but like I think there is a little, again, there was also a plethora of people who were like, so and so should be on this list. So I think the plan is, and I think by the time this will come out, like the upcoming list will have like a volume 2. So usually I do like a side A, side B, because the way that we post things, it's always like, you know, 9 songs and then another 9 songs. So we're going to do like a side C and D. So kind of just like make that list longer and just get more insights on that. So
I love that.
Yeah. Obviously, like, is there any I've asked a couple people on different podcasts about like either any bands with Black musicians that they would want to shout out, but I think it would be better, at least in this case, if there's any non-binary musicians or vocalists that you want to at least give a little bit of a plug here.
Oh man, I gotta think.
Yeah, putting you on the spot here. So
Lux from Philly is really great. They've kind of had like rotating members for as long as they've been a band, but one of the like 2 of the core members are Justin, their vocalist is non-binary, and their drummer Joey, I believe, is also non-binary, or
Okay.
either way, still
Is that
queer.
Lux?
XE.
XE. Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, yeah. Joey Ross is like the most iconic, sweetest human being that you could ever meet. Just like the most wholesome person, and he's like kind of like a cryptid. they're like so they're so elusive. I feel like trying to get in contact with them, it's just like always really funny. But they're from Philly, and they're a great band as well. That's what I can think of off the top of my head, but I feel like I could definitely send you a list of more when I'm not necessarily on the spot.
100%. And like there's I think the great thing about doing like a Spotify playlist is that it's so quick to just put something together. So there's definitely going to be a lot of like upcoming lists in, the near future. And, like I mentioned, like talking about Black Lives Matter is not something that should just be mentioned now. It needs to, keep our foot on the gas and always be talking about it in the months and years to come. So definitely want to do some indigenous highlighted playlists, want to do some non-binary. And yeah, just
Absolutely.
like always, kind of keeping stuff in the forefront. And like we mentioned earlier, taking those bands and those musicians and just embedding them in the overall thing. So someone could just be listening to a random week and they're like, oh, this band is cool. And then they just discover for themselves versus me just pushing it in their face.
Right, exactly. And they're like, oh, this person happens to be non-binary and they're in a band and they're on this playlist. That's cool. As opposed to like, here is non-binary,
Yeah.
like here's a full article about, or like a Twitter thread. Like,
Yeah. As far as things that are coming up for Buggin specifically, I know it's kind of, tough kind of figuring out things with quarantine and COVID. I'm
right.
not even sure like what the volatile nature is like in Chicago. But is there anything that you want to, tease as far as before we kind of wrap up here with
Yeah,
the band?
we are definitely writing music. So we're writing new music. We will have new music out like not soon. Ideally, like we're gunning for like the winter.
Gotcha.
So eyes out for that. I feel like we always release something in the winter. I don't know what it is about that season, but it's just, I guess that's just how the cycle has just always gone with us somehow. We just always put something out in the winter.
Yeah.
Don't know exactly when, but we are writing, so there will be new music soon. Things are kind of starting to open up actually now in Illinois, which I'm a little bit nervous about, but we like this state has had the least amount of like there's been no rise in cases or like deaths. We've had like the highest decrease in cases, which is actually good. So I guess it's like things are like starting to like open back up. So we practiced for the first time like I think last week. So we're just jamming, really trying to like we don't know when we're going to tour again. It probably honestly might not be till next year just because of the state of everything.
Yeah.
Like so hard to plan for anything besides like at least putting stuff out there, like putting content out there.
Yeah.
So there will be more content, at least that's what I can
Yeah.
guarantee.
Yeah, I was shooting someone a message about this before our call, but I'm honestly blown away that I've been able to do like a monthly recap playlist and have
Mhm.
18 banger tracks of like different shit that was released that month. So it's always
Yeah.
weird. Like I don't, I'm, we're kind of halfway through June here and I'm like, am I going to have enough? But then like someone shares something, like someone just drops one song or like an entire
Oh,
album and it's like, okay, yeah, this is going to be going to be good. So definitely excited
people are
for
bored right now.
yeah, and I think
Oh,
writing music is the best thing to do, especially with this kind of surplus of downtime. So definitely
yeah.
excited for more buggin music. Always bugging out forever. Is there
Yeah.
anything else, Bryanna, that you want to kind of share before we completely wrap up here?
I want to give a shout out to this shirt that I'm wearing. It's a Bad Brains bootleg. And it's honestly the highest quality bootleg that I've ever gotten in my whole entire life. It has 3 different colors on it.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's very, very high quality. Like, it's a little puffy. I think the designer's name is Jordan Casson. His big cartel is like Casson. He has really cool designs, like very cool, like fresh bootlegs. Probably some of the best I've ever seen. So if you're into bootlegs or anything like that, definitely check out that shop. Also, all of my friends in Playtime they're from Atlanta. They're releasing a new album. I think in July is when it's coming out. So you should definitely listen to them. Playtime and Symbiote are 2 of the coolest Atlanta bands out right now. And then Gadget, of course, No Option, Life's Question, like those are all of our boys. So like we always have to put them on.
Of course.
But yeah, those are the homies. So.
Major homies, especially Gadget. I love all those cool cats and kittens, and I definitely you need to that the first band from Atlanta, Playtime. You need to tell them to put their new music on Spotify, because that they were going to be on the list for sure, but no Spotify.
Oh, but they don't have anything on Spotify. Okay, so got it.
I'm tasking you to send out the word so I can give them a proper feature. Awesome.
Will do.
Yeah, Bryanna, this has been a great podcast. I really highly recommend everyone go check out BUGGIN. They have a new EP out called, I guess, Buggin' Out.
It's just the title.
yeah. And thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, your stories, your insights, and thank you so much once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course.